There's something oddly peaceful about riding a motorcycle alone at night. Just you, the road, and the hum of the engine. At least, that's how I used to feel. Until one night changed everything. Back when I was a student, my motorcycle was my only way of getting around. During the summer, I worked in hotel bars, serving cocktails to businessmen, tourists, and partygoers until the early hours of the morning. One summer, I landed a job at a grand, historic hotel deep in the countryside. The kind of place that looked like it had ghosts in the hallways and secrets hidden in its walls. That night, like so many others, my shift stretched on for hours. I spent the evening mixing drinks, wiping down counters, and making small talk with guests until we finally closed up. By the time I finished cleaning the bar, it was just past 2 a.m. I walked through the hotel's back corridors, heading for the small staff parking area where I kept my bike. The moment I stepped outside, I was struck by how silent everything was. The countryside at night has a way of swallowing sound, the kind of quiet that almost feels unnatural. It was a warm summer night, but the air had cooled and a thin mist clung to the ground. I zipped up my jacket, pulled on my helmet, and swung my leg over the bike. The engine sputtered to life, its familiar, low rumble comforting against the eerie stillness. I made my way through the local town, its streets deserted, save for the occasional flickering street lamp. Within minutes, I was on the open road, heading home through the countryside. There were no houses, no cars, just endless fields and shadowy trees lining the road. My headlight, dim and flickering, barely cut through the darkness. It wasn't much, but I'd ridden this road 100 times before. I knew every bend, every dip. Then, in my mirrors, I saw it. A sudden flash of bright blue headlights. Far in the distance, but closing in. Fast. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe just another driver heading home late, like me. But within seconds, those headlights had grown impossibly large, flooding my mirrors with blinding light. The roar of an engine filled my ears, and before I could react, a massive black Range Rover tore past me, inches from my handlebars. The sheer force of its speed made my bike wobble, and my heart jumped into my throat. Without thinking, I hit the horn, one long, angry blast. I shouldn't have done that. Almost instantly, the SUV slammed on its brakes, skidding to a stop right in front of me. My heart pounded as I squeezed my own brakes hard, my tires screeching against the asphalt. I barely managed to stop in time, avoiding a collision by what felt like inches. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps as I stared at the dark shape of the vehicle ahead. Then, the driver's door opened. A figure stepped out. My brain screamed at me to move, but for a moment, I was frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears. The man, because I could see now that it was a man, stood partially in the shadows, his posture tense, deliberate. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. Twisting the throttle, I jerked my bike forward, trying to shoot past the SUV. But just as I reached its side, he was already back inside, the engine roaring as he matched my speed. Then he swerved. Hard. His Range Rover veered right, pushing me off the road. My tires skidded as I hit the wet grass, the soft earth tugging at my bike, threatening to send me into a ditch. I fought to keep control, my body straining against the handlebars. Somehow, miraculously, I managed to pull myself back onto the road. But as soon as I did, I saw him again. He had stopped the car. This time, he was at the back of the vehicle, the trunk open. I watched, frozen, as he reached inside. He pulled out something long, heavy. A weapon? A bat? A crowbar? I wasn't sticking around to find out. I twisted the throttle as hard as I could, speeding past him, heart hammering. After about 200 meters, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The SUV wasn't moving. Not yet, but he was still there, standing beside it, watching. Then, slowly, he climbed back in. His headlights flickered back on, illuminating the road ahead. But instead of chasing me, he rolled forward at a crawl, eventually pulling over at the top of the road. He was waiting for me. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I checked my phone. No signal. I had two choices: keep riding straight toward him or find another way home. I took the long way, the really long way. I cut through side roads, twisting country lanes, anything to put distance between us. The entire ride home, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, just a step behind me, lurking in the darkness. I never rode that road at night again. I've told this story at so many parties, dinners, and gatherings over the years that it almost feels like an urban legend. But it's not. It happened. And every time I think about it, a chill creeps up my spine. It was September 2010. My boyfriend, Dave, his best friend, Tony, my best friend, Liz, and I were heading back to our hometown for our final year of college. We had spent the summer in London, staying at my uncle's apartment, partying, exploring, and just soaking in the energy of the city. It had been incredible, but now it was time to go home. The drive was long, so we split it over 2 days, stopping at a small bed and breakfast about halfway. We planned to leave early and get home around 6 p.m. But that morning, around 4 or 5 a.m., we discovered something that instantly killed our good moods. Someone had driven too close to our car during the night and completely snapped off the right-wing mirror. Seeing as this car was a gift from my dad, barely 2 months old, I was furious. We asked the landlady if she knew of any garages or places nearby that might sell spare parts. She hesitated, then mentioned something about a makeshift scrapyard she had driven past once. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she grabbed a pen, scribbled a rough map, and handed it to us. Now, looking back, maybe that was the first red flag. But we were young, frustrated, and just wanted a quick fix. So we followed her directions. As we got closer to the circled area on the map, the surroundings changed. The paved roads turned to dirt. Farmland gave way to empty fields, patches of wild grass, and dense trees. No houses, no gas stations, no signs of life. Just open moorland and woods stretching into the distance. At that point, I was ready to just suck it up and drive home without a mirror. The last thing I wanted was to be stranded in the middle of nowhere. But just as I was about to say something, Dave pointed ahead. There, barely visible through the trees, was a battered wooden sign with the words Cafe and Car Spares, 2 miles. The paint was chipping, the letters uneven, but it was a lead. We followed the sign down a narrow dirt road, winding through trees until we entered a small clearing. Parked in front of us was a rundown cream-colored hut with cafe spray-painted in faded red letters on the roof. Next to it was an old caravan, and just beyond that, a massive pile of twisted metal, rusting car doors, and spare parts stacked haphazardly. Liz had fallen asleep in the back seat, so we left her in the car and got out. The air was still. The sun had risen, but there were no lights on in the cafe, no movement, no sound. Nothing. Just eerie, unnatural silence. I walked up to the scrap pile, rummaging through broken headlights, car grills, and mirrors that had seen better days. Tony eventually held up a dusty, old-wing mirror that looked like it might fit. "Let's just take it and go," he muttered. But I felt guilty. It wasn't ours to take. So I knocked on the door of the cafe. The man who answered was unsettling. He was big, wide-shouldered, thick arms, rough skin, and a hard face. He looked irritated at first, like we had woken him up, but then, as he saw me, his scowl twisted into a wide grin, revealing just 2 rotten teeth. He stared at me, unblinking. Then, as Tony and Dave approached, he snapped out of it. His grin widened. "What can I do for you?" he asked. Tony held up the mirror. "How much for this?" The man chuckled. "Oh, don't worry about that," he said. "No charge. Just want to get to know you folks." Before I could respond, 2 more men stepped out from behind the caravan. Skinheads, both pale, greasy, and thin with sunken eyes and yellowed, broken teeth. They reeked of something foul, stale sweat, beer, and something else I couldn't place. They didn't say a word, just walked past us, grabbed the mirror from Tony, and made their way to the car. Ian, because that's what he introduced himself as, motioned for us to sit down on some dirty patio chairs. "Want a sandwich?" he asked. I politely declined. He insisted. I declined again. "Women are best at making sandwiches anyway," he muttered. "Why don't you come inside and make yourself useful?" I gave him a tight smile and shook my head. Dave stepped in, voice firm. She said no. The tension shifted. The 2 skinheads kept working on the car, but I noticed them exchanging glances. Ian sat with us, asking questions, where we were from, how old we were. It seemed normal at first, but then he started asking if I had a boyfriend. Before I could respond, Dave did. Ian smirked. "You 2 like to have fun together?" His voice had a disturbing lilt to it. He leaned in. "How often do you?" A scream cut through the air. "Liz." We spun around just in time to see one of the skinheads reaching through the back window, grabbing Liz's leg. The other was crouched near the tire, fumbling with something. Tony was the first to react, sprinting towards them. The men bolted into the woods. Liz was shaking, hysterical. She had woken up to find a strange man's hand crawling up her leg. That's when Dave noticed the nails. A dozen of them scattered near our back tire, carefully placed. My stomach turned. They were trying to trap us. We ran for the car, Liz still sobbing. Tony yanked open the door and jumped inside, slamming it shut just as I turned the key. And then we saw Ian again. He had stepped back onto the porch, something long in his hands. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. But as he moved closer, the shape became clear. A rifle. He was raising a fucking rifle. My breath hitched. I didn't think. I just slammed my foot on the accelerator. The car jerked forward, tires kicking up dirt as we tore through the clearing. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ian was running after us, the rifle now aimed directly at the car. I didn't care about the dirt roads anymore. I just drove, dodging potholes and tree roots, the car rattling violently as I pushed it past 90. We didn't stop. Not until we hit the motorway. No one spoke. The reality of what had just happened settled in like a sickness. To this day, I refuse to drive long distances through the countryside. And whenever I go to London, I take the train. I had just moved back to my college town after a difficult breakup, hoping for a fresh start. A friend and I had found a small apartment together, and while it wasn't much, it was enough to help me get back on my feet. The only problem was that I desperately needed a job. I'd been applying to just about anything: retail, customer service, office work, whatever I could find that would keep me afloat. Indeed had become my best friend, allowing me to track every application, and I kept a separate list for jobs I had applied to directly through company websites. Days passed, then weeks, and I was starting to get nervous. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. The area code wasn't familiar, but I picked up anyway, hoping for a job prospect. A woman's voice greeted me, polite but oddly rehearsed, telling me she was calling to schedule an interview. She claimed I had applied for a position at their company. I immediately opened Indeed on my laptop, scrolling through my applications. The company's name didn't match anything I had applied for. Confused, I stayed on the line, playing along. I asked for details about the position, but she dodged the question, giving vague descriptions about various roles available. Something felt off. I asked for the address, and she rattled it off quickly. I wrote it down and asked for a website where I could learn more about the company. She hesitated before changing the subject, quickly pushing to schedule the interview. "What time works for you today?" she asked. "Today?" I thought. It was already late afternoon. I told her I wasn't sure, but she was persistent, pressuring me to come in that evening. My gut twisted. Why the rush? A legitimate job wouldn't demand an interview on such short notice. I hesitated, but she wouldn't let up, so I reluctantly agreed, just to get her off the phone. After hanging up, I stared at the address on my notepad. Something wasn't right. I copied the phone number into Google, no results. I tried searching for the company's name. Nothing. My unease grew stronger. Finally, I searched the address and switched to Street View. My stomach dropped. The location wasn't a business at all. There was no office, no storefront, just a stretch of rundown buildings, cracked pavement, and a highway exit in the background. It looked deserted. I imagined myself driving there at dusk, stepping out of my car into the quiet emptiness. I pictured a single flickering streetlight, the eerie silence of an unfamiliar place, and my heartbeat pounded in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me, "Don't go." I closed my laptop and sat in silence for a moment before telling my roommate about the call. He shrugged and said I might be overthinking it. "But if you're not comfortable, don't go," he added. I didn't go, and the more time that passed, the more I realized how close I might have come to something truly dangerous. Later that night, I felt a deep, lingering unease. What if I had gone? Would I have been the only car in the parking lot? Would I have knocked on a locked door, only for someone to step out from the shadows behind me? Would I have ever come back home? The thought made me shiver. Looking back, I wish I had gone to the police. But at the time, I didn't trust them. A year earlier, I had tried to get a restraining order against an ex who had harassed me with burner numbers, sending me messages telling me to kill myself. The police had brushed it off, offering no real help. So, I never reported the call. Maybe it was just a scam, an attempt to get personal information. But maybe it was something far worse. I'll never know for sure. But one thing I do know, I'll always trust my instincts. And that night, they might have saved my life. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the strange and unexpected. If you enjoyed the story, hit that like button, share with fellow curious minds, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, stay curious, stay intrigued,